The CIA really did spend millions trying to find a mind-controlled drug. It was part of a big secret project called MKUltra. This project ran for a long time, from the early 1950s into the 1970s. The idea was to figure out how to control people's minds. They wanted to make someone do things they didn't want to do. They wanted to make someone forget things. Or maybe make them believe something that wasn't true. It sounds like something from a spy movie, but it was real. And it caused a lot of harm. It was the 1950s. The world was a tense place. The Cold War was on. It was a big fight between the United States and the Soviet Union. Not a hot war with armies clashing, but a war of ideas and secret operations. Both sides were scared of what the other might do. There was a lot of fear. Fear of spies, fear of bombs, and fear of something new, brainwashing. This idea of brainwashing really scared the US. It came up during the Korean War. American soldiers were captured by the North Koreans and Chinese. Some of these soldiers later said things that supported their captors. Some even confessed to war crimes. When they came back to the US, they seemed different. People couldn't understand it. How could American soldiers turn against their own country? The government and the public started to believe the enemy had found a way to control minds. They thought the Soviets or Chinese had secret methods, methods to change what people thought, to make them loyal to a new cause, or to make them give up secrets. It was a terrifying idea, and it made the CIA really worried. The CIA's job was to protect the US. They had to understand these new threats. They had to find out if mind control was real, and if it was, they needed to find a way to stop it. Or maybe even use it themselves. This was the thinking that started MKUltra. It was born out of fear. It was fear that the US was behind, fear that the enemy had a secret weapon, a weapon that could change people's thoughts. So, the CIA started looking into it. They wanted to know everything about how the human mind worked, and how it could be broken. They thought about all sorts of ways: hypnosis, torture, and yes, drugs. They believed drugs could be the key. Drugs could change a person's mood. Drugs could make them confused. Drugs could make them talk. Or forget. MKUltra was not just about drugs, though. It was a huge umbrella project. It covered all kinds of crazy ideas. Things like psychological warfare, interrogation techniques, how to make people spill secrets, how to build resistance to enemy brainwashing. But a very big part of it, maybe, the biggest part, was about finding a chemical that could control the mind. A perfect truth serum, or a perfect amnesia drug, or a drug that could rewrite someone's personality. The project officially started in 1953. It had many smaller parts called sub-projects. Hundreds of them. Many different universities, hospitals, prisons, and drug companies got money from the CIA. They often didn't know the money was from the CIA. They thought they were doing normal scientific research. The CIA used front organizations. They made it look like private foundations were giving the money. This kept the whole thing secret. It kept the real purpose hidden. The people running MKUltra had a lot of power, and they had a lot of money. They were given a free hand. They weren't really questioned. The Cold War was seen as a time of emergency, so extreme measures seemed okay to some. The ends justified the means. That was the idea anyway. They were trying to protect the country. Or so they told themselves. But this freedom led to very dark places. It led to experiments that crossed every line. There were experiments that hurt people, experiments that changed lives forever. The fear of brainwashing led the CIA to do things that were very close to brainwashing themselves. They were trying to find an imagined threat, and they ended up creating real ones. They started with a goal of understanding, but they quickly moved to a goal of control. And that control came at a very high price. The CIA's search for a mind control drug was intense. It was like they were looking for a magic potion, something that could unlock or lock up the human mind. And out of all the chemicals they looked at, one drug stood out the most. That drug was LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide. LSD was pretty new then. It was first made in 1938 by a Swiss chemist, but its powerful effects weren't found until 1943. It caused huge changes in perception. People saw things differently. They heard things differently. Their thoughts became jumbled. Their sense of self could disappear. The CIA saw this and thought, this is it. This drug seemed to have the power to break down a person's mind, to make them suggestible, to wipe the slate clean. So they started using LSD a lot. They thought it could be a truth serum. Give someone LSD and maybe they'd tell everything. They thought it could make people confused and disoriented. That would be useful in interrogations. Or maybe they could slip it to an enemy leader. And he'd make bad decisions. They even wondered if it could be used to program someone. to make them do something later without knowing why. The first experiments with LSD were often secret. They gave it to people without them knowing. These weren't willing volunteers, they were unwitting subjects. Some were regular people who went to bars. CIA agents would spike their drinks, then they'd watch what happened. They wanted to see the effects in a real-world setting. They called these unwitting experiments. And they were very dangerous. People had bad trips, some ended up in the hospital. Some were left with lasting mental problems. But the CIA didn't stop there. They also tested LSD on many other groups. Psychiatric patients in hospitals, prisoners, even their own staff. They would sometimes give it to these people for days, even weeks. They wanted to see how long the effects lasted and how intense they could be. They combined LSD with other things. With hypnosis, with sensory deprivation, with electroshock therapy, they were trying to push the limits of what a mind could take. They weren't just looking at LSD, though, that was the main one. But they explored many other chemicals, too. Mescaline, psilocybin from magic mushrooms, marijuana, cocaine, heroin, barbiturates, amphetamines, and many, many more. Some of these were powerful sedatives. They could put people into a deep sleep or make them lose their memory. Others were paralytics. They could make people unable to move. They wanted to find a drug that could make someone totally obedient, a drug that would make them forget who they were, or a drug that could make them spill secrets. They wanted to create Manchurian candidates. People who could be programmed to do anything, even assassinate someone, and then forget they did it. One project was called Project Artichoke, a precursor to MKUltra. It looked at how to create amnesia, how to make people forget specific events. They used drugs that caused heavy sedation. Combined with hypnosis, they hoped to erase memories or plant false ones. This was all about controlling a person's past, and by doing that, controlling their future. The researchers doing this work were often paid by the CIA. But they thought they were doing legitimate science. They thought they were helping humanity. Or that's what they were told. They were told these experiments would lead to new insights, new ways to treat mental illness, or to protect soldiers from brainwashing. They didn't know their work was part of a secret plan to control minds. These drug experiments happen in many places, in major cities, in universities across the country, in prisons, in secret safe houses. The CIA spent millions of dollars on this. They bought huge amounts of LSD. They funded labs, they paid doctors and scientists. It was a massive effort, and it was all done in secret. The idea was to keep the world safe, but they ended up making many people very unsafe. They traded human lives for secret knowledge, and that knowledge never really came. They never found their magic mind control drug, but they certainly tried, and the trying itself was a terrible thing. The way the CIA ran MKUltra was deeply unethical. They broke almost every rule of medical and human research. They didn't care about the well-being of the people they experimented on. Their main goal was information, and they would do anything to get it. The biggest problem was the lack of consent. Most of the people given drugs and put through these experiments never agreed to it. They didn't know what was happening. They weren't told they were part of a secret project. They weren't told they were being given powerful, dangerous drugs. This wasn't just a small oversight. It was a core part of the program. They wanted to see how the drugs affected people who didn't know what was coming. This was called unwitting experimentation. Imagine walking into a bar. You're just having a drink. Someone slips something into it. You start to feel strange. Your world turns upside down. You get scared, confused, and you have no idea why. This happened to innocent people. Some were sex workers, easy targets for CIA agents. Some were people with mental health problems, already vulnerable. The CIA saw them as expendable, as tools for their research. They didn't just give people drugs once. Some subjects were given LSD for days on end, or even weeks. Dr. Harris Isbell at a Kentucky prison gave LSD to drug addicts for 77 straight days. He studied the effects of continuous LSD use. The prisoners were promised things like parole or more drugs in exchange for participating. This wasn't real consent, it was coercion. One of the most disturbing parts of MKUltra involved a doctor named Ewan Cameron. He was a highly respected psychiatrist in Canada. The CIA secretly funded his work at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal. Dr. Cameron believed he could depattern the mind. He thought he could wipe a person's existing personality. Then, he could reprogram them. His methods were horrifying. He used what he called psychic driving. He would give patients massive doses of drugs, things like LSD and barbiturates. This would put them into a drug-induced coma for weeks or months. During this time, he would play recorded messages on a loop. Messages about their problems or about how they needed to change. He hoped to implant new ideas into their unconscious minds. But that wasn't all. He combined this with intensive electroshock therapy, far more powerful than normal. He also used sensory deprivation. Patients were kept in dark, soundproof rooms, sometimes for long periods. They were cut off from everything. No sight, no sound, no touch. The goal was to break them down completely, to make them blank slates. The results were devastating. Patients were not cured. Many were left with permanent brain damage. They forgot who their parents were. They lost their ability to talk. They became like children again. Their lives were ruined, and they didn't know that the US government, through the CIA, had paid for these terrible experiments. The CIA's logic was twisted. They thought these extreme methods were necessary. They believed they were fighting a crucial battle, a battle for the minds of people. They thought they needed to understand how to control minds, to protect the country from enemy mind control. But in doing so, they became the very thing they feared. They used the same cruel tactics they worried the enemy was using. The human cost of MKUltra was immense. People lost their memories, their identities, their ability to live normal lives. Families were torn apart. Some people died. The CIA never really admitted to the full extent of the damage. They just buried the evidence. They covered up what they did. These were not isolated incidents. This was a systematic program. Hundreds of experiments, thousands of victims, all done in secret. All done with utter disregard for human rights. The people running MKUltra saw human beings as guinea pigs. They thought they were doing something for the greater good, but what they did was a profound evil. It shows how easily power can corrupt, and how easily fear can lead to terrible acts. For many years, MKUltra was a deep, dark secret. The CIA wanted it that way. They knew what they were doing was wrong. They knew it could cause a huge scandal if it ever came out. So they kept it hidden. But secrets, especially big ones, have a way of eventually surfacing. The first big attempt to hide MKUltra happened in 1973. And Richard Helms was the director of Central Intelligence at the time. He had been with the CIA for a long time. He knew about MKUltra. He also knew that the political climate was changing. There was growing concern about government secrecy and about the CIA's activities. So, Helms gave an order. He told his staff to destroy all MKUltra files. All the records, all the documents, everything that detailed the experiments, the names of the subjects, the drugs used, the money spent. He wanted it all gone. He wanted to make sure no one could ever find out what happened. And his staff followed the order. Most of the files were shredded, burned, erased. It was a massive act of destruction. It meant that a lot of the truth was lost forever. Without those files, it would be almost impossible to piece together the full story. It would be hard to identify all the victims. It would be hard to know exactly which doctors did what. The CIA thought they had successfully buried MKUltra for good, but they made a mistake. Not all the records were destroyed. A small number of financial records survived. These were kept in a different part of the agency. They weren't seen as project files in the same way. So they weren't included in the shredding order. This oversight would later prove crucial. In the mid-1970s, the public started demanding more transparency from the government. The Watergate scandal had just rocked the nation. People were suspicious of power. Congress decided to investigate government abuses. They set up committees to look into the CIA and FBI. One of these was the Church Committee led by Senator Frank Church. The Church Committee began looking into the CIA's past. They found some strange financial records, records that showed money going to universities and hospitals for unusual projects that involved mind-altering drugs. These were the few surviving MKUltra documents. They were just enough to raise big red flags, and so MKUltra was finally exposed. In 1975, the Church Committee released its findings. The report was shocking. It revealed that the CIA had secretly experimented on unwitting American citizens. It detailed the use of dangerous drugs, the lack of consent, the ethical breaches. The public was outraged. How could their own government do such things? The news caused a huge scandal. People couldn't believe it. The idea that the CIA had tried to create mind control drugs and that they had hurt so many innocent people in the process. It was a betrayal of public trust. But because most of the records were gone, getting full accountability was incredibly difficult. The CIA couldn't identify all the victims. They couldn't say exactly what happened in every sub-project. It was like trying to solve a puzzle with most of the pieces missing. Still, some victims did come forward. People who had been experimented on. People who had suffered lasting harm. They began to tell their stories. They sued the government. In some cases, victims or their families received small settlements. But it was often a long, hard fight, and for many, the money could never truly make up for what they had lost. Sidney Gottlieb, the chemist who headed MKUltra for much of its run, was brought before Congress. He admitted to some of the programs, but he gave limited information. He expressed some regret, but mostly defended his actions as necessary for national security. He was never truly punished for what he did. The exposure of MKUltra was a harsh lesson. It showed the dangers of unchecked power. It showed what can happen when an intelligence agency operates completely in the dark. It forced the US government to put new rules in place. Rules about human experimentation. Rules about oversight. But the damage had already been done, and for many, justice was never fully served. The truth was out, but it was incomplete, and the scars of MKUltra would last a very long time. MKUltra might have officially ended in the 1970s, but its shadow still hangs over us. It left a deep mark, not just on the people who suffered directly, but on how we view government and science. The project might be over, but its legacy and the questions it raises are still very much alive. One of the biggest impacts was on public trust. People lost faith in the government. If the CIA could do something so awful and keep it secret for decades, what else were they hiding? It made people deeply suspicious. This distrust didn't just go away, it became a part of how many Americans view their government. It created a sense that secret powers might be working against them, and it also hurt science. Or at least the public's trust in scientific research, especially when it came to psychology and psychiatry. If doctors and researchers were willing to do such terrible things under the guise of science, how could anyone trust them? It highlighted the absolute need for ethical guidelines in human research, guidelines like informed consent, and guidelines that ensure people are treated with respect and not as lab animals. These rules exist now because of projects like MKUltra. But it was a painful way to learn that lesson. The idea of mind control itself became a huge part of popular culture. Movies, books, and TV shows often feature themes inspired by MKUltra, secret government programs, brainwashed assassins, altered memories. It fuels conspiracy theories. Some people still believe the CIA perfected mind control and is still using it. While the actual results of MKUltra were far from perfect mind control, the attempt alone was enough to cement the idea in the public imagination. This brings up a big question. Did the CIA ever achieve its goal? Did they create a perfect mind control drug? The answer is no. They spent millions, they hurt countless people, but they never found a reliable way to control a person's mind completely. They couldn't make someone into a robot. They couldn't wipe memories and install new ones like software. What they found was that drugs could confuse people. They could disorient them, they could make them suggestible. But true, absolute mind control remained a fantasy. The project showed the limits of such extreme methods. Instead of creating controlled individuals, they often created broken ones, people with severe mental health issues. People with shattered lives. The science they pursued was often more destructive than constructive. But the story of MKUltra also reminds us about the power of secrets, and about the potential for abuse within powerful organizations. When agencies like the CIA operate without proper oversight, terrible things can happen. It shows why transparency and accountability are so important in a democracy. It's not just about protecting secrets from enemies. It's about protecting citizens from their own government. For the victims and their families, the legacy is one of pain and injustice. Many never got a proper apology, many never received full compensation, and many carried their trauma until their dying day. For them, MKUltra isn't a historical footnote or a conspiracy theory. It's a very real wound. It's the memory of a time when they were used, abused, and forgotten. The questions linger. Were there other projects like MKUltra that we still don't know about? Are there still secrets being kept? The destroyed documents mean we may never have the full picture. We might never know the names of all the people harmed. We might never understand the full scope of the CIA's ambition in this dark chapter. MKUltra stands as a stark warning. It's a story about fear driving extreme actions. About the belief that the ends justify the means, and about the terrible consequences when humanity is sacrificed in the pursuit of power and control. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest threats come from within. It teaches us to be vigilant, to ask questions, and to never let such things happen again. The search for a mind control drug was a failure in its aim, but a massive success in showing us the absolute worst of government secrecy and unethical behavior. And that in itself is a very painful but necessary lesson to remember.